Elizabeth Flock is a reporter for PBS NewsHour. Her new book, The Heart is a Shifting Sea, offers a look into the marriages of 3 Indian couples. With a kind of all-access pass to their private moments, Flock exposes the candid thoughts in these relationships, particularly those of the women. This book is the latest in what the New York Times calls the marriage is changing because women are changing movement in nonfiction. But what sets this book apart is what Paul Schagel calls Flock's patient and careful presentation of these couples for whom conventional notions of marriage have become fundamentally challenging. Flock is joined today by It's Been a Minute with Sam Sanders from NPR. And ladies and gentlemen, with that, Elizabeth Flock and Sam Sanders.
How are you?
I'm good.
Yeah.
How are you?
I'm great.
Good.
I'm honored to be here with you today.
Thank you.
Watching you go through this process, it is so awesome to see the fruits of your labor be so well received. So I think my first question for you is, how are you doing? You're knee deep in your first book tour with your first book launch. How's it going?
Above water? No. It's exciting.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. What's most surprised you about the response so far to the book?
I think the surprising thing has been how much people care about each of the people in the book and have really specific questions about how they're doing and where they are now and how intimately acquainted they feel with all of them.
Yeah. So that said, tell folks here briefly about each of the 3 couples.
So this book follows 3 Indian couples over a long period of time. I met these 3 couples, all of them about a decade ago when I first moved to India after college. And I started following them then, informally at the time. I just started, by a combination of reasons, lived with a number of Indian couples when I first moved to Mumbai and sort of saw the inside of a marriage, because I think the only way you can really see what's going on in marriage is by living inside people's homes. And I was doing that and had a lot of questions about what I saw. There were a lot of tensions within these homes, I think because of the tremendous social, cultural, political, economic change going on in India right now and the way that that was placing tensions on the Indian marriage. And so I had a lot of questions at that time, started asking them questions informally about their marriages, and then later on went back and said, I want to write about your marriages, and then combined sort of formal sit-down interviews with just spending a tremendous amount of time living with them.
And don't undersell it. She lived with these couples for months at a time. How much time do you think you spent with them?
Well, probably hundreds of hours. I lived with each of them for at least months at a time. And I think that was really the only way to really get to know them, because if you just go home at the end of every day, I mean, the things that would happen where I felt like that were most revealing of their marriage, the times when I learned the secrets that were really happening behind closed doors was often at night, or after people had sort of let their guard down at the end of the day, or just before bed when a really intimate discussion would happen, or a fight would happen after the sort of tension and chaos of the day. So I think that was really important.
Yeah. I'm partial to Maya, but I want you to describe all 3 couples briefly for folks out here.
Maya and Veer are in their 30s. They had a love marriage against her parents' wishes and sort of against all odds. And their story follows, it really follows Maya more closely, and the growing independence of Indian women and sort of the tension that that's placing on a marriage, and particularly for her desire for independence and the way her husband sort of is grappling with that. And, her desires for more than what he's giving her, and how infidelity plays a role there. Ashok and Parvati are even younger couple. They have sort of this hybrid or half love, half arranged marriage, which is becoming more common in India today. A lot more people are choosing someone, but within the parameters that their parents set up for them. And that story sort of revolves around the fact that even though she had some choice, Parvati in that couple wanted to marry someone else, she could not because he was a Christian. And her trying to come to terms with that in her marriage. And then the third couple is Shahzad and Sabina, who are an older Muslim couple who only met once before their wedding. It was very much a traditional arranged marriage, and are not able to have a child and are struggling with that. reality and how that comes into play with their religion and the rules that their community follows.
So you're going to read a bit for us now.
Very short, I
about
promise.
my favorite couple, Maya and Veer.
And this is from the prologue. In Mumbai, people say the monsoons make everyone fall in love. But this year, the rains are late and the June nights are hot. So are tempers. Maya and Veer fight in the early mornings inside the bedroom of their 11th floor apartment in a colony of concrete apartment buildings in a far north suburb of the city. One morning, they fight so loudly it agitates 4-year-old Janu, who is playing with his toys in his bedroom down the hall. He pushes the door open to their room to see his father, in dress pants and no shirt, shout and point a finger at Maya, who is seated on their low bed. "Do not raise your voice with my mother," Janu says, in his grown-up way of speaking. "I do not like that. Say you're sorry." My superhero, thinks Maya. To her, Janu looks every bit the part, even though he is so little, with his dimpled chin and gelled hair combed off to one side, a single lock falling into his forehead. Maya once thought Veer also looked like a superhero, with his glossy hair, open face, and irresistible smile. She didn't even mind his 6 toes or lazy eye, which he said were signs of extra specialness and good fortune. "I'm sorry," says Veer, not looking at Maya, as he gathers Janu up in his arms. In the days that follow, Veer and Maya hold their tempers in check. On cooler days, it is easier. And on a Sunday morning not long after, when several fragile clouds arrive to mercifully block out the sun, Veer surprises his wife and tells her he won't go to work that Sunday. Ordinarily, Veer spends Sundays as he does every day, working long hours at the family aluminum foil business. After he leaves, Maya and Janu often board the local train to go to Crossword, a chain bookstore Maya loves for its fiction and its coffee shop, and Janu for its toys. The shopkeepers let Janu play on the floor for hours while Maya sits hunched over a book, often by Rumi or Haruki Murakami. They will do anything for the attractive mother with the big, kohl-rimmed eyes and petite but curvy figure. "Madam," they whisper to each other, "looks just like a movie star." When Janu gets bored of playing, Maya takes him on her lap and tells him fantastical stories. "Let's go to Crossword, Maya," Veer says now, using his pet name for her, which he seldom does these days. "I'll come along this time." If you are a stupid woman, Maya thinks, you'd say, "Well, at least he's around, Baba." But she knows he only wants to come for Janu. "Okay," she says, and gathers up her purse and Janu's backpack, and checks that she has both her phones. A text from Subal pops up on her screen. She reads it and then quickly puts her phone away. At the sight of Subal's name, her mind often wanders to that first day they spent at Aksa. Aksa Beach is just 30 minutes away by auto rickshaw, but it feels a world apart from the city's pollution and chaos and noise. It is nothing like her frenetic suburb, once a quiet village and now one of the city's most congested areas. But most of Mumbai's suburbs are like this, officially a part of the city and just as noisy and crowded as the downtown. Within minutes along the drive to Aksa, by contrast, the roads become slow and winding. Along the route are small, quiet rivers where local people fish and young boys swim. And at the end of the road stands a grove of trees, which opens up into a magical seaside hotel. Whitewashed and sprawling and encompassed by green, the hotel is called the Resort. The Resort is their place. It is where Subal tried to steal a kiss in December when there was a mild breeze. They ate from the breakfast buffet and sat talking for more than an hour beside the pool. The water was a clear, still blue, and the palm tree fronds hung over them. Maya found herself drawing lines on his palms. They both wanted something, but did nothing. Then she and Subal had gone back again in May. May was the Big Bang, or so they called it. The day when the energy and tension between them led to a kind of explosion, everything out in the open at last. "Come on, Mayu," Veer says, and Maya refocuses on her husband, who is holding open the front door. He stands next to a colorful lettered sign that reads Suktara, which means happy star. It is the name Maya gave their home when they moved in.
Part of why I love the book so much is that as much as it tells the story of these 3 couples and their relationship, it also really tells the story of a changing India and how the dynamics at play in these relationships are directly influenced by societal and cultural change in India itself. In your mind, what was the biggest shift that you found while writing this book that had the biggest effect on marriages like these?
I mean, I think by far the biggest impact is on women, and sort of the data bears that out. There are more women being educated, there are more women working outside the home, there are more women juggling that with children, and more women watching pornography and choosing to have affairs and premarital sex, and just having a lot more agency and independence, and being really vocal about sexual assault and all of these issues. And anecdotally, at least, what I found in the marriages I followed is that placed tremendous pressure on marriages, because in many cases their husband did not feel the same way and was not sort of moving in the same direction. And when they were moving those opposite directions, that obviously places tremendous pressure. And in the case of Maya and Veer, something from early on is that Maya is not okay with having what her mother's generation had, which is a husband that supports you financially and that maybe isn't around that much, or wants dinner on the table. And so she really just desperately wanted companionship from her husband. And Veer is not able to make sense of that and is trying desperately to understand why what he's giving is not enough. What his father gave is what he's giving, so it's a very confusing time for both of them.
Yeah. You talk in the book about why you wanted to write the book, and you said you wanted to write it because in your mind a book like this did not exist. What did you mean?
I think as a journalist working in both India and the U.S., and then coming back after years spent in India to the U.S., seeing the way that India was covered, I think I comment in the author's note, but people talk about how, and remains true, and this was talked about 50 years ago and remains true, that India, of course, is often only seen in exoticized way, through salacious stories about gang rapes or through Bollywood fantasy, and that's about all we get. And so there's a very one-dimensional view of that country that you have, and I just felt like I wanted to understand, the stories that I wanted to read about India were a lot more intimate and nuanced, and so I think that is what I meant.
Yeah.
And also, I think the middle class in India is often not written about, and so in hindsight, not that I was thinking about this that much at the time, but I think I was interested in the middle class, and this idea of middle class morality that exists in almost any country, which is sort of the idea that people will talk and that you can't break the rules because neighbors will talk and the community will talk and in-laws will talk, and just there's this idea of what cannot be said and what cannot be done that I think has tremendous pressure on the middle class and is definitely playing out in India right now.
Yeah. Another thing that you addressed in the author's note of this book is writing this book about this place and these people being who you are. Mm-hmm. For those who might not know, Liz is white. All the people in her book are brown and from India.
And when not married.
Yeah. And when you began this process, in the back of my head, as your friend, I said, girl, you better be careful. Because it is so easy to walk into a culture that is not your own and get it wrong. I think you got it right. Talk about how you did that and how you navigated that. Mike.
Yeah. I mean, I do think really, I distinctly remember my first year in India working at Forbes India Magazine and just feeling like I was a total badass and I had everything covered and I knew some Hindi and I felt like I was get people to talk to me and I felt like I knew everything. And very quickly that was upended, that fantasy that I had, and realized that I knew absolutely nothing. And I mean, India in particular, the idea that you feel like you have some understanding of the country at large is an absurd notion, with hundreds of languages and communities and so many different religions and backgrounds and castes, and it's incredibly diverse in every single sense of that word. And so realizing and coming to it with the idea that you don't know most things and that you're starting from a place of tremendous ignorance, I think is really important. And also, I think that's why I decided to write this book not in the first person, because I really wanted to let these people, as much as is possible in a nonfiction book that I'm writing, tell their own stories. and have it be from their voice, and have them make comments about how India is changing from their own voice, instead of me as like sort of some omniscient narrator telling you that this is how I believe India is changing. And they had so many different ideas about all of these things. Whether it's Maya talking about women having more independence, or Sabina talking about Muslim women and what they're experiencing right now. And, all of those things they had a million ideas on, and I wanted to let them say that.
Yeah. And I think what's shown through in the book is that you didn't come into your research or your work with this with the answers kind of in your head. I felt like you left the book maybe with even more questions than you had before. Yeah. And it was refreshing because I think we're used to a lot of Americans covering different places, giving answers and telling folks this is what it is. How did you work with maybe leaving this process a bit unsettled? I mean, I still have questions about all the couples. I still have questions about how they might change in the future. Do you feel resolution with this yet? Do they feel resolution?
Not at all. But I mean, I think as journalists, there is this tremendous pressure to feel like we're putting across on the page that we are the authorities on this. We know everything. We've got this covered. Don't worry, reader, you're in safe hands. And that's important to some extent. But I also think it's important to be transparent on what you don't know. And also, like with marriage, I said this before, but I truly would go visit these couples and feel like I knew how they were doing. And I would leave and I would say, that couple is doing great, and this couple is on the verge of divorce, and I'm really worried about this, and they're certainly going to be divorced by this time next month. And then I would call them 2 weeks later, and they would be like, we're doing absolutely beautiful. I've had the best day with him, and I'm in a state of shock, and I don't know what to do, and I just sit there in silence because I felt like I had it covered, and I didn't at all. And with marriage, that's certainly more true than almost any other subject, and how quickly things change.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. One of the things that was not in the book that I found very interesting hearing you tell me about it one-on-one is what you did to gain access. When you described the book earlier, you kind of underplayed it. Like, you weren't just working to live with these couples. You were working to be actually kind of part of their families, because all of the families and the couples in the book, you weren't just living with them. You were living with parents and,
in-laws and
yes,
dozens of cousins and family. I mean, because of course in India, joint family home is so common. Oftentimes there would be cousins and cousins of cousins, and suddenly there would be not 7 people living there, but 14 people living there.
And then you're just there.
And then I'm just there in the corner.
So how did did you just say, hey, I want to live with you? Did they walk us through that?
Yeah, it kind of varied, but I think in each case, it required being like super transparent about, this is going to involve me living in your house, being up in your business, and can I travel with you? Can I go to work with you every day? Can I go eat every single meal with you? Like, for the next month, just consider yourself not alone. Like, can I sleep in your bedroom? Which people were like, absolutely not. Okay, maybe like one night a week. I was like, I just want to hear your pillow talk.
You had no shame about doing this?
No, but I mean, there certainly were different reactions.
What was the worst reaction?
I mean, Shahzad and Sabina's family was by far the hardest, because they're a very conservative family. There were like 14 people living there, and so I had to get permission of all 14, and then they also had relatives in Dubai and Saudi Arabia and the UAE who they had to call for permission, and the matriarch of the family hated me just for, I don't know, unknown reasons. And, and I very much, like, there were a lot of rules of that house that I needed to respect, and if you're an idiot, you're not going to respect those, or you'll just try to say you're going to do it your own way. But, and that house, I think I told you, I ended up staying there for a month without really leaving their house, because that was sort of the rule. And Shahzad told me, if you leave, you're probably not going to be able to get back in, because I've convinced them this one time, but like once you leave, they're going to start talking masala about you, and then you're not getting in again.
So you never, you didn't even go out to take a walk around the block?
No.
Okay.
So, yeah, so it was definitely hard to convince, but also, it was a constant evolving conversation over 10 years. And so I felt like I was always asking for permission again. Like, can I still be here? Is it still okay for me to be there? And, I think there were surprisingly few times where people said, I don't want you here. And by the end, everyone was just having huge caterwauling fights in front of me, did not care at all. Like, in the beginning, people were like, okay, we're going to have a fight. Can you go outside? And then, like, by the end, no holds barred.
Yeah.
So.
Well, there were parts of the book where I'd ask you, did you really go there with them? Yeah. When they went there, were you there? And you were like, yeah, I was there. And it was a feat. How do you think you're covering these couples and researching them and being with them and writing about them, how did you, in this work, change their relationships?
I definitely think I changed the relationship. And at the beginning, I sort of was like, okay, you're going to have zero footprint. You're not going to have an impact. You're just going to be as, like, straight-faced and, like, objective journalist here who's just taking notes. And I quickly realized that that was sort of an absurd notion because, I mean, they were constantly asking me advice, like, when Veer said that was absurd, right? Like, I should be super upset about that. And what am I going to just sit there and be like, I have no opinion. And, you know, at times I felt like a third wheel or a therapist or a friend or a family member or a journalist, or like it really varied. And I think one thing I've thought about a lot is just by very virtue of someone asking you questions about your marriage, it changes the fabric of your marriage. Because a lot of times in relationships, I think, personally speaking, like, you can go through a relationship and not ask yourself the hard questions, and you can date someone for years and not interrogate yourself about, like, what is not right about this relationship or what you're doing wrong. And I feel like by very virtue of asking those questions all the time, like, they were forced to take a hard look at their marriages. And so I'm conscious that, like, this book probably did have a huge, maybe not a huge, but a small impact on them in that way.
Have they read it?
4 of the 6 people have read it.
How'd that go?
It went a variety of ways. They're mostly okay with it. Parvati called me and she said that she was like, there's an error. And I was like, oh my God, what is it? And she said that, she was like, you know that time when I was walking down the street with Ashok and we were holding hands, and then you said that we brought the hands up slightly. I don't think we did that. And I was like, okay, this is a mistake. But no, there's actually, you know, some of them have asked me to make, like, small changes for the India edition, which I'm going to do because, you know, one of the hugely important things about this project was maintaining their anonymity. All the names are changed. Nothing else has changed in the book at all, but their names are all changed. And
I asked for a photo of Janu, the kid in the book. She wouldn't even show me a picture of him. So anonymous.
Yeah, but it is important because of that middle-class morality that I was talking about, which is that people will talk and people will judge them for this. And certainly, like, Maya's infidelity would be a hugely, you know, it would impact her life if, you know, as she's a principal at a school, if those people found out, it would be hugely impactful. So.
I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we're going to open it up for you all to ask questions. Full disclosure, I had Liz on my show this week to talk about her book, and it was a delightful conversation. And the one question that I asked you that I still can't get out of my head was, what was the biggest lesson you learned about love and marriage and relationships from doing this, from writing this book? So I'm going to put you on the spot again.
I'm going to tell you the 2 things.
Yes.
And one of them was about expectations. And I think in all of these couples, I felt like all of us go into relationships with huge expectations of what we want from the other person. I think one of the things I learned from them was the times at which their marriages worked the best were the times when they sort of allowed the other person to be who they were and didn't expect them to fit some ideal, which may sound like totally lame and obvious, but I felt like I saw that play out again and again with all the couples, and that is very much a fabric of arranged marriage, right? I mean, you have to go in with less expectations because you're going to have to meet that person wherever they are, and sometimes arranged marriages are something born out of cruelty and terrible, and other times I think there's like a really lovely relationship that develops with someone you didn't really know and you come to love. And the second thing on a personal level, I think, is to spend more time alone. Something I saw with these couples and I saw with myself was marriage provides so much and relationships provide so much in terms of stability and joy and a partner in crime and someone to support you and love you. And so it's really seductive, I think, to want to always love and be loved. But for me, the times that I feel like I've learned the most and I saw these people learn the most was the time spent alone.
So the moral of the story in the book about marriage is go be by yourself.
You just wanted to end with this.
No. Liz, I'm going to read this book probably 4 or 5 times in the next year and talk to you about it 5 or 6 more times. Thank you for this. Everyone else, we got questions now.
I just came back from India and spent a little time in Mumbai in the south. And all the guides we had were women, and they would say, we asked them about marriage, and they'd say, if my children married a Muslim or a Christian, I would never talk to them again. And we were sort of outraged and perplexed. But their system is so tight that I think it's true. Did you find that to be so?
Yeah, interfaith and intercaste marriages are really a tremendous rarity. And even, like Ashoka and Parvati, she couldn't marry the person she wanted to because she's a Hindu Tamil Brahmin. I mean, she's a Hindu from the south, from the highest caste, and the person she fell in love with was Catholic. And her father wouldn't even entertain the idea and was furious that she even brought it up. And I remember when I first moved to Mumbai, there was a Muslim-Hindu marriage happening at the same time. Her parents were hosting a mock funeral for their daughter, being married to someone from another faith. And I think that is one of the most persistent, sad, tremendously sad things. And there's this long tradition in India of loving someone that you can't be with, and unfortunately that so much is the case. And some of that is changing. There's certainly people who are younger generation who are saying this is absolutely absurd. I just did some research for a story on Valentine's Day in India and how contested it is, and it's largely based around this idea that people should not be with someone from a different religion or a different caste, and beating up couples that are interfaith couples. And of course there's a huge movement against that. However, one thing I saw is that Ashoka and Parvati, at the end of years of interviewing them, Parvati, who had wanted to have this love marriage, said, I think in the end, she was pregnant. My daughter is going to have an arranged marriage as well with someone who's also a Hindu Tamil Brahmin. And so I saw the arc of even that one person sort of falling into those old ways in such a short period of time. So changing, but not very fast.
Hey, Liz.
Hello.
I'm so happy for you. This is so great. So we talked when you were writing about the narrative nonfiction and about the distance and how you were taking a very formal approach to this. But I was interested to hear you talk a little bit about the process and about the ins and outs and the complexity of it. And it seems like a very fundamental question of whether you put yourself in the book and you sort of reveal your relationship to these couples, or you don't. And I'm wondering if it's anywhere in the book. I mean, do you deal with it in the introduction? Do you let the reader into how you got into this place? I haven't read it yet, obviously. Or is that kept out completely?
In the author's note, I do go into some of that, but I largely leave it out. And I think the time when I realized I wanted to leave it out is when I first found out that Maya was cheating on her husband. And I came to this book with a lot of baggage myself. I moved to India after my father's 3rd divorce, and I was definitely in search of some pretty specific answers about why marriages work or don't work. And my father had cheated on both his wives, so when I found that out, I sat alone in a room and cried. And I just felt like if I put myself into this book, that I was going to come to it with a lot of judgment, and that was going to come across on the page. And you can try to be as objective as you want, but if you have those strong feelings, which I did about all the couples, and I'm sure that still has seeped in, but as much as possible, I wanted to try to remove myself and my own judgments and biases from that and just allow their marriages to be the focus.
Hi, Liz.
Hi.
Question I have for you is, I know how much you love Mumbai, and it just seems like, of course, there are three really strong couples in this book, but it seems like Mumbai played a huge role, and it's like another character. So can you just talk a little bit about your relationship with the city and these characters and how they lived and moved for these relationships to Mumbai?
Mumbai is a very particular place, and I think when I tell people I love India, what I'm really saying is I love Mumbai so specifically. And it is very much a place that I think anyone who's been there has the experience of being obsessed with getting back there when you're not there. And then the second you get back there, you feel like panicked, like you have to get out of there immediately. And like you feel like you just got punched in the gut 50 times within the first 10 minutes of landing. You know, all of the change that's happening across India is happening, I think, anecdotally speaking, at even like a lightning faster pace in Mumbai. Mumbai is India's like most frenetic city. It's the financial hub. It's the hub of Bollywood. It's the city of dreams and of all of this sort of fairy tale notions of love. And people come to Mumbai to make it, and they come to Mumbai to meet the man of their dreams, and they come with all these expectations that they can go from a street sweeper to a Bollywood star, whatever it is. And it's such a place of like expectation and possibility that to me, like following marriages there, it makes so much sense. And it is sort of the clash though of these like illusions and magical dreams that we have, and then when reality sets in.
Hi. So I'm wondering, I know we talked a little bit about access, but and I know you kept everyone anonymous, but I still think it's astonishing that these people let you into their lives in this way. And I wondered if you could talk to us about how you did that, and actually why they would agree to it.
Yeah.
It seems crazy that they would, especially in the culture that you've described.
Yeah. I mean, in part, I think it was just time. The fact that I first asked about this a decade ago, and then was sort of like, why are you still hanging around 10 years later? Like, please, are we done yet? But I also think it meant a tremendous amount of trust that they had in me. And I did go over, like, specific scenes that were in the book with everyone, so there were no surprises. So even though they maybe remembered that I was there, they may not have expected that to be in the book. And so we sort of went over everything that was coming and that would be in the book. And I don't know, I mean, I think people agree to things like this for different reasons. I mean, I think like one of the couples has been texting me like, who's gonna play me in the Bollywood film? And so like, that may have been part of the motivation. And I think others sort of felt like they enjoyed the process of being asked questions, and maybe, like, I think saw it as therapy, or told me, like, people don't go to therapists here, like, this has been helpful. But definitely there were also times where they were like, I regret doing this project, and I was like, do you want to stop? And then change their mind. So I do think time was the most important thing, and like in grad school, studied under professors that did immersion journalism, and had like 8 million questions for them about this and the ethics of that. And because you're not really you're not an objective observer, and you keep trying to be, but like really, if you feel like you're not their friend, that feels absurd at the same time. So balancing that is tremendous.
So when you went over scenes in the book with them, would you change things?
They asked, the only thing that I did is if they asked specific scenes not to be in there at all, I did agree, of course. And, I tried to say, okay, it's just important that I try to express this about your marriage, but if this particular scene doesn't work for you, like, could we use this instead that maybe illustrates that you guys weren't doing well at that time? And so there was some of that negotiation, but there was a surprising amount of people saying, just put all the masala in there, it is what it is. So, anyways. Hello.
Hey, thanks for the talk. You really emphasized middle-class morality and sort of how class plays a role in this. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about how the trends you're talking about changing India are exhibited in Indian elites, and like how the people you were talking about would say, well, rich people can get away with stuff like this, right? Or are already because they have the resources or the access or the Western exposure, or whatever it is. And linked to that, like examples from Bollywood, and whether that came up a lot in what people were talking about. Like, who were the people they were looking to?
Yeah, I mean, I do think the middle class has less freedom than the very rich or the very poor. And certainly the very rich can get away with things. And one thing that I feel like is not being talked about is how many women are having affairs in India right now. I mean, anecdotally, like every woman I talked to was absolutely having an affair or was having an open marriage arrangement that just wasn't really being verbally addressed with their husband. And particularly among the very rich, I mean, there was like non-monogamous relationships and orgies and affairs and just, I mean, it really ran the gamut, but none of that was being directly spoken about. And you would just sort of hear people talk about this behind closed doors, whisper it to their friends. And I feel like, certainly some of this is playing out in Bollywood more. And you see, I mean, back in the day, a kiss was never shown, of course, in a Bollywood film, and they would just cut to like two candle flames intertwining. And that has changed now. But it's not like we're seeing lots of sex scenes, right? But yeah, I do think, and there's also a lot more availability of pornography. And I think everyone from the very rich to the very poor is watching pornography on their mobile phones. And that's certainly changing the way that people are thinking and talking and having sex. So. Hi.
I look forward to reading your book, and this might be something you cover in the author's note. I've also spent some time in Mumbai, and one of the issues you mentioned earlier is that it is such a frenetic place. People are kind of living nearly on top of their neighbors. It's hard to really find privacy, and so I wonder, this notion of anonymity. You mentioned you didn't leave one of the houses for a month, but the other two couples, I would imagine that their neighbors and their community would have been wondering, who is this blonde woman coming into our neighbor's house every day? And then they get this book and they see it at Crossword, and it's about couples, and it's written by a blonde woman that they may have seen. I'm just curious how you reconcile that.
Well, some of the couples actually had frank discussions with the neighbors that they thought might read the book, or in-laws, or parents, or family members, like beforehand, and sort of went through everything that was in the book that those people would not know. But some of the people that I'm most worried about reactions from don't speak English and don't read English books. And so my worst fear was that this would ever be translated, which thank God it's not being. So I think that certainly is part of it. But, I did try to make myself as invisible as possible, and I didn't go around like meeting every single neighbor they had. But that's certainly something we've been talking about, and very specifically like going through like, okay, Sunil lives 3 doors down. What if Sunil read it? What would his reaction be? What do we want to talk about? And really going through like everyone in their community and what those reactions would be. So.
Hey. So one thing I'm a little unclear on is how you first identified these 3 couples to actually concentrate on. And another question that I have is, beyond that, is were there any couples that you had identified as being of interest to you who ultimately turned you down?
Yeah, so at the beginning of this project, I think 10 years ago, I thought that I was going to write a novel about this. There were 7 couples I wanted to follow, and then I went back to the U.S. After living in India for 2 years as a reporter, and there were sort of 3 couples that I just couldn't get out of my head, and I kept talking to them, and I kept thinking about them, and it came into my dreams, and only later did I start to articulate even for myself why it was these 3 couples, and I say in the book, like, to me, they were romantics, and they were also rule breakers. Like the boundaries that were being pushed in India right now because of this social and cultural and all of these changes, someone in that couple was making the decision to push the boundaries. And sometimes it was with huge repercussions, and sometimes they were able to successfully do that. And I saw those tensions playing out in those couples. And so I think as a journalist, I just wanted to understand what was happening with that tension and how that would play out. And I also, I just admired them in certain ways, and I admired the people who were pushing those boundaries. But the 3 couples all agreed that I asked. There was another couple that disappeared, and I've never been able to find them again, that I wanted to follow. But otherwise, yeah.
Hi, Liz.
Hello.
So you finished reporting, and you have like 10 years of notes and transcripts and recordings and like porn search histories and like so much to go through. And I'd love to hear how you, guys, it's a really deep book, how you like organized everything and thought about structure and writing once it was time to like move out of their house and start your book.
I mostly use this application called Scrivener, which is amazing, which is an application on your computer that you can organize your notes and thousands of files, and it's tremendous. But for the structure, which I think was truly the hardest part of this project in terms of the writing, I had thousands of notepads, and at one point I was at my mother's house in Chicago, who's here, and I had like put it all over the wall, and I think she came up slightly alarmed one day because there were like thousands, maybe not thousands, but there were many, many multicolored, and I was like frantically moving them around into different places, and that was mostly like just, I had a list of like 200 scenes I wanted to put in the book, and I was rearranging them all like a mad person and having dreams about how they should be rearranged. But I think the marination and the thought behind the structure is probably what took the longest, and was really difficult to organize and important for me. I don't know if everyone it works like this, but just to like see it visually. So,
hi.
Hello.
I just had a comment.
Yes.
I've lived in this country for 48 years, and I was born in Chennai, South India, and grew up in Madurai and now Bangalore. And I go every year to India.
Okay.
And the comment you made, I just want to let everybody know that there are millions of people, women, middle-class women, who are not having affairs.
Okay, you're correct. You're correct.
Who are not having
You're
orgies.
correct. No, you're correct.
Maybe
of
the
course.
only man they have kissed, and maybe in my case, was my husband.
Sure.
And of course, we won't
Sure.
even talk about extramarital sex or premarital sex.
Sure.
So I just want to assure everybody.
You're correct. No, I'm sorry. And if I seemed to imply that, I didn't mean that.
I'm kidding. But
thank you. That's an important note.
Like Barbara Bush, who said that her husband was the first one she kissed.
Sure.
Millions of us are living that way.
Sure.
So,
no.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So what's fascinating in your case as an author is that you sit at an intersection of media as well as literature. But one question I particularly have, when we look at media today, the focus of media on private space is mostly the focus on the lives of celebrities, right? But you've written a book about people who are generally anonymous, and most of us are anonymous in that sense. So what do you think we're missing by not focusing on the private space of ordinary people?
I just think anyone, we all keep secrets, and in marriage, not married, but from observing these marriages, it seems that even more secrets are kept, and that sometimes those secrets really reveal so much about ourselves and about how we really think about things, how we truly feel about politics or each other or the social change that's happening around the country or about the media we consume. And I think a lot of those conversations do only play out in private spaces, and I don't know how we could do a better focus on that, though. I think it's really hard to know what's going on behind closed doors, and there's a reason that we all keep so much close to the vest and keep private. But this is a hard one. I don't know. I don't know. I think the thing that I just kept thinking about is how whatever it is that we display to the public, of course, is so different than what's behind. And maybe some of that's a good thing. I don't know.
Hi, Liz. Congratulations. Yes. I had a question knowing you and your writing history, reporting on business and politics and the arts. And I'm wondering, once you get through this tour and release, what is inspiring you now that the book is done? And what are you hoping to focus on next?
I think it's telling more women's stories. And I think that was something I didn't really realize that I was focused on with this project until the end, is how focused I was on how women are changing around the world, whether it's India or here, and, watching the Me Too movement happen here, very much India had this moment 5 years ago after the 2012 Delhi gang rape case when thousands of women came out into the street to protest. And so just thinking about how those changes are playing out for women around the world, whether it's around sexual assault or working more or balancing that with domestic duties or whatever that change is, I think I'm interested in digging deeper on that. So.
There's a pause and questions from them, so I'm going to ask you one more question. Watching you walk through this process as your friend, I kept saying to myself, well, damn, Liz picked the hardest kind of book to write. It took years and constant follow-up, and you were back and forth between two continents all the time. So my question for you is, would you do this kind of book again? And if so, what would be different in your process?
Let maybe spend a little less than 10 years thinking about it. I'm eager to apply the lessons that I learned from this to another one. And maybe not pick a subject that was so close to the bone. In a way, hopefully that made the project better. But I think it also took a really big personal toll and sometimes felt like I'm writing about something that's I care about a little too much.
Would you do it again, this kind of book?
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have any more questions from the audience?
Yes.
We're good. One more.
Did you learn anything, hi Liz, did you learn anything about gender and being up so close to these couples, about men or about women in that particular culture or more broadly?
I don't want to make any more sweeping generalizations accidentally. No, I mean, I don't know. I think I was consistently frustrated with the Indian men that I followed, and that is not a comment on Indian men at large, but I was frustrated with what I felt and what I sometimes feel here with some of my male friends as well was like an inability to play catch up to what I saw were the changes happening with the women in their lives. And I don't think that's happening everywhere, of course, but I think that was one thing that I kept coming back to. And no, that's not necessarily anyone's fault, but I think at a time of huge change, it's just really confusing for everyone, and there are a lot of changes happening within gender and gender roles right now, and I think it's really hard for people on both sides to wrap their heads around. So.
And what about India took you there after college? Why was it there and not Cambodia or Kenya or somewhere else?
I had just read a lot about Mumbai, and I was obsessed with what I had read, but there's also sort of an apocryphal tale about my great-grandmother going to India and visiting there by herself, and I think as a child I heard that story, and but I don't know. Someone's asked me that a lot of times, and I don't have a good answer. So, thank you.
Yeah, we're there. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you. Appreciate it.